Well, we are still about 100 days out until the next election day on November 7th. It may seem a long ways away, but voting this year will look different. You'll need to make sure you bring an ID to the polls. And here today to talk about the new voter ID laws in our state is Charlie Collicutt, Guilford County's election director. Good afternoon to you, and thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
All right. Well, text in any questions you may have about voter ID or the election process. Send them to 336-379-5775. Well, let's start here. What IDs, of course, can be used?
Yeah, there's a lot of different IDs that voters can use, and I'll just kind of list them out here. There's the North Carolina driver's license, your U.S. passport or card, the non-operator's license ID from the DMV, the photo ID card that you're going to be able to get from your local Board of Elections office. Not right now, but soon. Certain college and universities, certain charter schools, certain approved government IDs, other things like your military IDs, tribal enrollment cards, or IDs from public assistance agencies. So it's a long list, and a lot of voters are going to have one of these. And then, of course, we'll talk about the other exceptions later on.
Gotcha. And what about expired IDs? Now, are any of those valid?
Right. So it's interesting. Some of these IDs are okay. Some of these are not going to be okay. So generally, your driver's licenses, your school IDs, anything that you can get from the DMV, those are going to be okay as long as they've not been expired for longer than a year. Okay, so it can be expired, but it has to be for a year or less. But other things like a military ID, a tribal enrollment card, or a photo ID from a public assistance agency, there is no expiration for that. So you're going to be okay regardless.
Okay, good
And
stuff.
the final caveat, and I'll get into one more exception. This can be confusing, but if you're over 65 and you have an expired ID, that's okay as long as it was not expired when you turned 65. So I know that can be a little confusing, but if you're over 65 and it expired before you were 65, you're going to be okay.
Okay. Now, can you still vote without an ID, and what would that process specifically look like?
Yeah, so there are ways. So first, I would note that if you don't have an ID right now, there are ways you can go get a free ID for voting at the DMV, and soon you'll be able to come to our Board of Elections office in order to get a free ID as well for voting purposes. But if you don't have one, if you don't have anything, and you go to the polls and you don't have the ID, you're going to be able to vote a provisional ballot, and you're going to fill out an affidavit that says that you have that there's an exception for you to show that photo ID, that there was a reasonable impediment for you to get that ID. And there's a list of things that the voters can choose from and fill that affidavit out, and then they can vote a provisional ballot.
And Charlie, can student IDs be used to vote as well?
Some student IDs can, some cannot. So the law requires an approval process that the schools must apply for in order to have their student IDs accepted. Right now, the State Board of Elections has approved IDs from NCANT, UNC Greensboro, and Bennett College. And that's it right now for Guilford County. Now, that could change in the future. There's other opportunities for the other colleges to get approved. But right now, those are the only ones.
Gotcha. And does that kind of go along with, how people can find out if their student IDs is public employee ID will count as well too?
It depends. Again, it depends.
Okay.
So the college and universities and most employment IDs are going to have to be approved, and employment IDs from uh, public entities are going to have to be approved by the State Board of Elections, and some have and some have not, and that's going to be a growing list that we won't quite have pinned down until right on the eve of the election.
Gotcha. And are there any exceptions to the voter ID law? We talked about these a little bit, but if so, what are they?
Yeah, so there are a host of issues that voters can claim is a reasonable impediment for having their ID, and you're going to attest to this on an affidavit, but there are things like the voter had a lack of transportation, was sick or ill, didn't have the documents they needed, like a birth certificate, that it's been lost or stolen or applied for, and then there's religious exceptions and natural disaster exceptions. And if you can claim one of these exceptions, like that you've applied for your ID and it hasn't arrived yet, and you do a provisional and you fill this form out accurately and truthfully, then that's a provisional ballot that will be counted.
And I imagine too on the website there, it kind of lists out the exceptions and maybe even also thoroughly explains each one as well too. If folks have a question about that.
Right, and so that's a good point. The State Board of Elections website has
Okay.
a great amount of information. There's a lot. There's a lot of different kind of IDs. There's a lot of little expiration date tweaks here and there. There's a lot of things that voters need to know that it's really hard to just hear and take it all in. So I would encourage voters to check out the State Board of Elections website and other info we put out as we get closer to election time.